display a decal warning passengers to look for cyclists when opening the door. Intro number 373, sponsored by Councilmember Powers, in relation to scheduled vehicle retirement dates for taxi cabs during the COVID-19 state disaster emergency and the repeal thereof. Intro number 676, sponsored by Majority Leader Farias, in relation to requiring the Taxi and Limousine Commission to conduct a study and report on increasing the use of electric for hire vehicles and installing new charging infrastructure. And intro number 1050, sponsored by Councilmember De La Rosa, in relation to limiting the amount of liability coverage that the Taxi and Limousine Commission may require for vehicles licenses. Proposed Reso 80A, also sponsored by Majority Leader Farias, on the New York State Legislature, calling on the New York State Legislature to pass and the New York State Governor to sign legislation that would create a surcharge for hire vehicles that would go towards funding the expansion of wheelchair accessible and all electric FHVs. The TLC, created in 1971, included medallion taxi cabs for hire vehicles known as FHVs, commuter vans, and paratransit vehicles. Over the last decade, the landscape has dramatically changed with the introduction of mobile application-based for hire vehicles in the city. From 2011 to 2024, for hire vehicles increased from 39,700 to approximately 108,000, putting immense pressure on our yellow taxis. App-based FHVs and the emergence of new technology has increased competition for trips in the city, leading to a decrease in the number of medallion taxi trips in the city and revenue earned by drivers. Since 2014, there has been a rapid decline in taxi medallion values, from a peak of almost $1 million to a median sales price of approximately $120,000 as of September 2023. The large decline in medallion values, coupled with a decrease in total fares collected, has continued to cause severe financial hardships for many taxi medallion owners. As a result, many drivers, owners, and advocates have called on the city for help. The creation of the Taxi Medallion Owner Relief Program and the subsequent Taxi Medallion Owner Relief Program Plus provides assistance to small medallion owners struggling with debt. It helps them work with lenders in order to restructure their loans, reduce principal owed, and lower their monthly payments. As I have talked with drivers and owners, many have stated that the programs are simply not enough to address the mounting debt faced by medallion owners. To supplement these programs, the administration and the TLC commissioner implemented an agreement that provided hundreds of millions of dollars in debt relief for more than 3,000 medallion owners. In addition to this, the recent COVID-19 pandemic further drove daily trips and driver revenue. Although medallions are coming out of storage, monthly data reports released by TLC indicate that the number of unique yellow taxis on the road as of July 2024 are still 24% lower than their pre-pandemic levels. More recently, on January 5th, 2025, MTA launched its congestion pricing program in the city, requiring that yellow taxis be charged an additional 75 cents per trip when driving in and out of the congestion relief zone, which includes all roadways south of 60th Street with minor exceptions. Under this program, taxi drivers and for-hire vehicle drivers pay additional tolls when they drive into these areas, which are passed on to customers in the form of increased fares. These have not been easy years for drivers and owners of taxi medallions. That is why we convened this hearing, to hear drivers' concerns and understand how we can address them in an effective way. Today, along with the topics discussed above, we will be delving into a wide topics pertaining to the TLC. including TLC's electrification efforts, yellow cab retirement, TLC's decals for drivers in regards to cyclists, Uber's partnership with yellow cabs, insurance requirements for vehicles, and other major issues in the industry. In particular, I want to better understand the potential impact of limited personal injury protection or PIP requirements currently mandated by TLC, and the effects that would have on drivers, passengers, pedestrians, and all New Yorkers. I will now allow the sponsors of intros number 193, 373, 676, and 1050 and Reso 80A to speak on their legislation. I'll now ask Majority Leader Farias to provide her opening statement.
Thank you, Chair Majority Whip Sylvana Brooks Powers. Good morning, colleagues. I'm pleased to have Introduction 676 heard and discussed at today's hearing, a bill that advances New York City's commitment to sustainability and cleaner transportation. As we push for a greener, more resilient city, we must prioritize the electrification of our for-hire vehicle fleet, while ensuring the necessary infrastructure is in place to support that transition. This bill directs the TLC to conduct a comprehensive study on the costs, challenges, and opportunities of expanding electric for-hire vehicles in New York City. It also requires a report with concrete recommendations, including incentive programs to encourage drivers and companies to transition to EVs, strategic locations for new EV charging stations to ensure accessibility and efficacy, and targets for ensuring and issuing EV licenses and expanding the charging infrastructure. Additionally, TLC will be required to report twice a year on progress towards these goals, ensuring accountability and a data-driven approach to electrification. The transportation sector is one of the largest contributors to New York City's carbon emissions, and transitioning for-hire vehicles to EVs is a critical step in meeting our climate goals. For-hire vehicle drivers need support and incentives to make this switch. Many of them, especially independent drivers, face financial and logistical barriers when considering an EV. This study will help us understand how the city can make the transition easier and more affordable. Expanding EV charging infrastructure is key to making electric FHV a viable option. Without sufficient charging stations in the right locations, we risk slowing down the adoption. Introduction 676 is about smart planning, sustainability, and equity. We can't ask for-hire drivers to go electric without ensuring that they have resources to do so. And I urge my colleagues to support the bill so we can make a more meaningful action on electrifying for-hire vehicles. And just quickly on Resolution 80, this is urging the New York State Legislature and the governor to pass legislation that would place a surcharge on for-hire vehicles to fund the expansion of wheelchair-accessible and all-electric for-hire vehicles. As a city that prides itself on being inclusive and environmentally conscious, we must take meaningful steps to ensure equitable and sustainable transition options for all New Yorkers. Reso 80 supports the state-level legislation that would establish a surcharge on for-hire vehicle rides, generating dedicated funds to expand wheelchair-accessible for-hire vehicles, ensuring that people with disabilities have equal access to transportation, and it'll accelerate the transition to all-electric for-hire vehicles by reducing emissions and helping New York City meet its climate goals. This dual-purpose funding model recognizes that both accessibility and sustainability are pressing transportation challenges that must be addressed together. And I urge my colleagues to consider signing on to both of those bills, my introduction and resolution, and look forward to the dialogue today from the administration, the TLC, the advocates, and our drivers. Thank you.
Thank you. And before we begin, I would like to thank my staff and committee staff for their hard work. Kevin Katowski, Senior Policy Analyst, John Basile, Senior Policy Analyst, Mark Chen, Senior Counsel to the committee, our new counsel, Elliot Heisler, Adrian Drapal, Senior Financial Analyst, Julian Martin, my Policy and Budget Director, and Renee Taylor, my Chief of Staff. I will ask that if you have a phone on in here that you turn it off. Any disruption, you will be asked to leave the chamber. We are also joined in the room by Councilmember Lewis, Majority Leader Farias, Councilmember Narcisse, Councilmember Banks, Minority Leader Ariola. I will now ask committee counsel to appear and to be sworn in with the administration. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next panel will be from the Taxi and Limousine Commission. Commissioner David Doe, General Counsel Cheryl Aludo, Deputy Commissioner for Operations, People and Innovation Evan Hines. I will now administer the oath. Please raise your right hands. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before this committee, and to respond honestly to council member questions? Thank you. You may begin when ready.
Good morning, Chair Brooks Powers and members of the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure. I am David Doe, Chair and Commissioner of the New York Taxi and Limousine Commission. I'm here today with the General Counsel Cheryl Aludo and Deputy Commissioner for Operations, People and Innovation, Evan Hines. Thank you for the invitation to provide an update on the city's taxi industry and start a dialogue on a set of bills on the agenda. As the oversight topic of the hearing today is the taxi industry, following the oversight hearing back in the fall, which concentrated on for-hire vehicles and commuter vans, I'll focus my testimony on yellow cabs. In recent months, yellow taxis have reported about 3.7 million trips previous post-pandemic months. In fact, the 3.8 million trips completed in October 2024 were the highest since early 2020. Taxi trips overall are at about 50 to 55% of pre-pandemic levels. Even before 2020, taxi trips were on the decline, with 11 to 13 million trips completed each month in 2015 and 6 to 8 million completed in each month in 2019. So while the longer trend in taxi trips has been one of significant decline, there are hopeful signs in the recent trip increases. Similar positive trends are evident in other taxi-related data, including the numbers of drivers and vehicles on the road each month. Working drivers, working vehicles, and vehicles not in storage have all been on a consistent rise, all hitting post-pandemic highs in recent months. For example, 9,768 taxis completed a trip in December of 2024, which is the highest number of active taxis since the 11,315 that completed a trip in March of 2020. Industry revenue is also on the rise, with hourly and monthly gross revenues for taxi drivers even exceeding 2019 levels thanks to the taxi fare increases TLC adopted in 2022. Industry fare box revenue is now consistently at about $3 million per day, up over 40% from the fare increase. In sum, while there are fewer trips than in 2019, there are also fewer drivers and vehicles, and each trip has more revenue potential. So on average, those who are working are earning more than they did in 2019. While it's still far too early to make an assessment on the impact of congestion pricing on the taxi industry, the early data is hopeful. With taxi trips up about 10% in the first week, it was in effect compared to the same week in 2024, which is consistent with the general upward trend of taxi trips before congestion pricing went into effect. As we continue to monitor the data, we may see that some people are choosing to take taxis rather than their personal vehicles in the central business district. Reduced congestion allows taxis to complete more trips in shorter times. The general increase in taxi trips is strong enough to overcome the impact of the small additional surcharge, or most likely some combination of these factors. TLC will continue to analyze the impact of congestion pricing on the taxi industry and all of our licensed industries as more data continues to accumulate. And we will continue to show that data and all the data that I've mentioned today on the TLC fact book, so that the public can monitor the industry trends and impacts for themselves. Perhaps the most impactful recent issue for the taxi industry has been wheelchair accessibility. As ordered by the Federal District Court, TLC adopted rules requiring all new taxis be wheelchair accessible. This has a major impact on the finances of both the taxi industry and the TLC's Taxi Improvement Fund, which uses a $1 passenger surcharge to subsidize accessible vehicle conversions and accessibility programs. As more taxis become wheelchair accessible, which is of course a good thing, TLC has to make difficult decisions about how to allocate limited TIF funds to more efficiently and effectively to improve wheelchair accessible vehicle service and make sure we meet the court-imposed deadlines for 50% of the taxi fleet to be accessible We will continue to work with stakeholders from the taxi industry and the disability community to determine how we can increase accessibility while ensuring the continued economic viability of the industry. This brings us to the bills on the agenda. I'll start with Intro 193. This bill would require all taxis and for-hire vehicles to display a decal warning passengers to look for cyclists when opening a door, with the decals being provided by TLC at no cost to vehicle owners. As a Vision Zero agency, the safety of all roadway users is a top priority. For example, last year, TLC launched our new driver license renewal course, which includes Vision Zero material and simulations. In 2024, TLC issued 17,993 violations to TLC licensed drivers for illegal parking, stopping, or standing, including for blocking a bike lane. And just last week, we proposed new rules that would increase the penalty for these violations under TLC's Persistent Violator Program to better deter this behavior in the future. TLC has provided Vision Zero Look for Cyclists window decals to vehicle owners since 2012 and continues to do so at our licensing and inspection facilities and at outreach events. We also enlist industry stakeholders such as fleets and base owners to distribute the decals to the members of our staff, to the members of the community on our behalf. We think this voluntary approach has worked well and achieved widespread use of these decals without the enforcement measures that the requirement would entail. If the council is interested in creating this new decal requirement, it may be worth and TLC regulations to avoid clutter, which runs the risk of passengers overlooking the messages. Intro 373 would allow taxi owners to extend their vehicle retirement dates during the COVID-19 state of emergency declared by the governor. TLC understands the financial hardship that many drivers and vehicle owners sustained during the pandemic. TLC already has processed for vehicle retirement extensions and granted 3,777 during the aftermath of COVID from 2020 through 2023, granting 90% of extension applications over that period. Additionally, TLC recently amended its rules to eliminate the retirement schedules for wheelchair-accessible vehicles in an effort to increase the number of wheelchair-accessible vehicles on the road, while also providing vehicle owners financial relief. As to the proposed bills, the COVID-19 state of emergency has long since lapsed, so it appears that this bill would no longer have the desired impact on retirement dates. More generally, because of the new waiver requirements discussed earlier and a federal court order, we have serious concerns that any retirement extensions for non-accessible vehicles would risk the taxi industry failing to meet our accessibility mandates discussed earlier. In other words, if a non-accessible vehicle is scheduled for retirement and replaced by an accessible vehicle, extending that vehicle's retirement would prevent another wheelchair-accessible vehicle from being put into service, reducing accessibility and causing TLC to run afoul of a federal court order. For these reasons, TLC opposes Intro 373. Intro 676 would require TLC to conduct a study and issue a report on the costs and challenges of electrifying the TLC licensed fleet. TLC's Green Rides initiatives adopted in October 2023 requires high-volume for-hire services, currently Lyft and Uber, to dispatch 100% of trips to electric vehicles or wheelchair-accessible vehicles by 2030, with annual benchmarks increasing until then. I'm proud to note that more than a year ahead of schedule on this effort, by the end of 2024, about 20% of trips that were dispatched were EVs or wheelchair-accessible vehicles, outpacing the 15% required in 2025. But I recognize that we have a long way to go, and as charging infrastructure, an all-of-government approach along with private investment is needed to ensure that infrastructure keeps up with demand. To help inform our public and private sector partners, TLC has recently published 2 electrification reports, the first in 2022 called Charged Up, and the latest called Electrification in Motion, released in September 2024, with the most recent report developed after Intro 676 was introduced with a deliberate eye towards many of the questions that the bill would direct TLC to address. Electrification in Motion analyzes data generated by the fleet of more than 10,000 EVs now performing trips and documents the rapid expansion of charging investments since the Green Rides initiative launched. As discussed in the report, Green Rides is already having its desired effect by spurring new charging infrastructure, including more than 200 new fast chargers stalls from Tesla, Revel, a DOT fast charging site in the Bronx, and an upcoming dramatic expansion of the DOT's curbside level 2 network in the neighborhoods where TLC drivers live. As documented in the report, while not an infrastructure provider, TLC has worked closely with the public and private sector partners, including other city agencies, Con Edison, the Port Authority, and companies like Tesla and Revel. We will continue to advise them on how best to ensure the charging infrastructure keeps pace with TLC licensed EVs, including by sharing data where appropriate, especially with other city agencies like DOT. To this end, alongside the report, we published a new interactive driver residence map that partners can use to inform their plans for new charging. We hope that voluntary reports TLC has published, in addition to the EV metrics posted on our fact book, tools like the interactive driver residence map and the analysis of EV infrastructure in our annual license review report and the analysis of EV driver expenses in the expense report we recently commissioned address many of the concerns raised by 676. But we would be happy to further discuss how TLC can even be more transparent about the EV landscape as it relates to TLC licensed vehicles. Lastly, Intro 1050 would prohibit TLC from requiring licensed vehicles to have personal injury protection, also known as PIP, or no fault. Coverage in the amount of greater than state law, effectively reducing PIP coverage from $200,000 to $50,000. In the late 1990s, TLC adopted insurance requirements that exceed the minimum levels set by the state as part of a broader effort to address safety in the for-hire industry. In our view, these higher no-fault limits ensure all roadway users, drivers, passengers, pedestrians, cyclists, are quickly and adequately compensated in the event of an injury-causing crash, especially when the injuries are significant or involve claims from multiple people. Additionally, we think the higher coverage is appropriate for TLC licensed vehicles, which are largely used as full-time for-hire vehicles by professional drivers as compared to other locations in New York and elsewhere in the U.S., where drivers are more likely to be part-time. While we understand the intent of the bill is to lower insurance premiums for drivers, and we support this goal, it is not clear that driver premiums will actually go down, as reduced coverage doesn't necessarily mean reduced premiums. In other words, we are concerned that the savings resulting from this bill may be kept by insurance companies rather than passed on to drivers. While needed coverage for roadway users is reduced, we welcome further discussion on this issue with the council and stakeholders to ensure that any changes benefit drivers and all New Yorkers. Thank you again for inviting me to provide an update on the taxi industry and offer the administration's positions on the proposed bills. We look forward to continuing to work with you to ensure a healthy taxi industry and all TLC licensed industries can continue to provide safe, accessible, sustainable service for New Yorkers and visitors. I'm now happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. We've been joined by Councilmember De La Rosa. I'm going to give the councilmember a moment to speak on her bill.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Commissioner, for being here. Good morning. I'm Councilmember De La Rosa, prime sponsor of Intro 1050. Thank you, Chairs Brooks Powers, for convening this important discussion regarding the future of our for-hire vehicles and the public for engaging civically on this matter. The taxi and limousine industry has helped generations of New Yorkers and immigrants gain financial footing in our city. My district in Northern Manhattan, along with the Bronx, are home to the majority of livery bases in the city, making today's discussion particularly important to my constituents. This industry has put students through college and led to the opening of many small businesses, bolstering our economy for decades. My family, like many working-class New Yorkers, includes several hardworking taxi drivers. This industry is vital to the city's economy and identity, and we must do what we can to rebalance the rising costs, keeping it running. This crucial legislation arrives as American Transit Insurance Company, the city's leading insurer for taxis and rideshare services, teeters on the brink of collapse, jeopardizing the livelihood of over 74,000 drivers, representing over 60% of the city's driver. By lowering insurance requirement, this bill will help avert some of the fallout from ATIC's insolvency. With the Black Car Fund and heightened street regulations aimed at reducing collision, congestion, and speeding, and other traffic incidents, there are ample buffers to deal with claims. Cab drivers also are more experienced drivers, spending thousands of hours a year on the road with additional oversight from our commissioners. Risking an accident means losing their livelihood. By reducing the personal injury protection requirement from $200,000 to $50,000 to match the statewide requirement, we are creating an equal standard across the state, reducing drivers' out-of-pocket costs and making the insurance market more accessible to additional carriers. We don't want anyone to get hurt and not have coverage. If we are seeing abuses in the system and fraud that has driven up costs and gone unaddressed for decades, then we also want to remedy that as lawmakers. I acknowledge that this will not be a magic remedy to the serious issues plaguing the industry. It is one tool in a toolbox that must include fixes from the state legislature and reinvestments in the industry from all partners. New York City is famously associated with taxi cabs. Today's conversation intends to take stock on this industry that has significantly changed since the insurance requirement was last raised, as you said, to $200,000 in 1998, as well as ensure the city's culture and economic icon is a strong standing to continue operating safely. Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner, for your testimony. I'm going to start with the medallion values. In a previous 2023 hearing with the TLC stated that the current medallion value as of October 13, 2023 was transacting at $200,000. Resale on defaulted medallions sold for about $170,000. What is the current value of the medallion?
So the TLC does not keep track of medallion values, but we keep track of transfers of medallions in the private marketplace. I think when in 2023 we last had the discussion, I gave a range, and that current range is between $90,000 and $200,000, consistent with what you just said, Council Member.
Do you have an idea of what the current resale on a defaulted medallion is?
So on average, it's about 130. So from the MRP Plus program, I think that's what the question is. It was between 135,000 on average, and as high as 170,000, depending on what type of medallion, or excuse me, depending on whose medallion it is, what lender is providing financing for that medallion or not, cash versus a bank-backed medallion.
How many medallions have been exchanged in fiscal year 24, and how was that number compared in previous years?
Yeah, so what is important to know is that most of our data is on our website. We publish that data on a monthly basis, and we show that transfer. Anywhere from 20 on up per month, but Cheryl can provide a little bit more about how many medallions have been transferred over the last year or so.
I don't have that right in front of me, but it's true, everything is on our website and it's very transparent.
So that means you guys can look it up while we're here and let us know.
You can look that up.
Yes.
Thank you.
And I think we have it.
Okay. Does the TLC forecast medallion values? I guess you said, I know you don't really track them, but do you forecast them at least?
We do not forecast, no.
So, Councilmember, again, you know, based on the sensitivities around the medallion crisis about 6 years ago, you know, TLC does not have in its practice to forecast or say what medallion values should programs that provided debt relief to a variety of owners of medallions. Where is it? Okay, so so just to go back to your question on transfers, in calendar year 2023, there were 777 transfers of medallions, and in calendar year 24, there was 1,003.
Thank you for that. How does TLC work to ensure that medallion values increase? Does TLC have any direct role in this?
Yeah, again, that is a place for the private market. We don't own medallions. We don't look at medallion values, but we provide a certain sustainability with overall the market. We evaluate the market, look at meter rates, see if they are consistent with the current market. But in terms of medallion values themselves, the TLC does not play a particular part in that.
Thank you. Going into the Taxi Medallion Owner Relief Program, the TLC Owner Driver Resource Center assists in the administration of the Taxi Medallion Owner Relief Program, also known as MRP, and the Loan Guarantee Program, or MRP Plus. These programs both provide debt relief for eligible medallion owners. Since its inception, how much money has been provided to owners in the MRP and MRP Plus programs? And can you give us a breakdown of the funding for each program?
So we are incredibly proud of the MRP and MRP Plus program. It has done wonders to change many driver and owners' lives. Over the last 2.5 years, the program in total has provided over $471 million of debt relief for our drivers and our owners of medallions who own 6 or less medallions. That broken down is about 2,367 medallions that were supported through this program, and over 2,034 medallion owners. There was about $65.7 million of city grant funding that were provided to incentivize participation in this program. And then there is a $50 million reserve fund to support the overall ongoing costs of the program.
How much money has been provided to yellow car owners in 2024, and how does that compare to previous years?
Yellow car owners for which program, council member?
For the same Taxi Medallion Owner Relief Program.
Okay, so for MRP it was 71 million. For MRP Plus it was 400 million.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Sure. MRP 71 million. MRP Plus is 400 million. And the average amount of debt relief was about $200,000.
How much staffing has TLC dedicated to assisting yellow car owners through the MRP and MRP Plus programs?
So we have a owner driver resource center that works with a variety of different nonprofits, including NILAG, which is a legal provider, to support the ODRC. There are 4 staff members that are dedicated to the ODRC, plus an assistant commissioner. And within that program, we also provide partnerships with well-being organizations, including New York City Health and Hospitals. We provide financial literacy help and then also legal help as part of the program. And so within the program, there's 3 to 4, actually 4 plus the assistant commissioner, including the assistant commissioner, and then a variety of different organizations that provide direct support and referrals for our drivers.
And Commissioner, since the program's inception, how many owners have applied for the debt relief?
Through the program, there were over 4,000 drivers that have gone through the ODRC for a variety of different things, to see if they qualify for the program or for other assistance that we provide at the ODRC. But within the program itself, we provided assistance to 2,034 owners.
And in terms of those owners who have applied for assistance through these programs in 2024, how does it compare to previous years?
Well, so the program has sunsetted as of April 2024, but a majority of not participate initially, and then we assisted them through that process and then closed it in April of 2024. For some people who were still behind, we had a closing date of 12/31 of last year. And so we helped everyone who was able to get their lender on board by that time. And that was the promise that I made to the industry.
And when the program was up and running, what were some of the common reasons for denial, if any?
The biggest one was that their lender did not want to participate. So we provided an incentive of $30,000 and a city-backed guarantee to support the industry and the loans, and we backed it. And so for many of our medallion owners, they no longer had a personal guarantee on their mortgage, their assets, or other things, right? The city took that on. Unfortunately, some lenders were a little greedy. Like they wanted more, and they did not want to participate in this program. They wanted to go after the assets of some of our owners.
How many taxi medallions were foreclosed on in 2024?
So in the MRP Plus program, there was about 419 that are in default status, and about 45 defaulted medallions have been sold. And so that is in the MRP Plus program.
You said 45?
45 in the MRP Plus program. 419 that are defaulted 90 days or more. And so that's just in the MRP Plus picture. And we always anticipated that people who participated in the MRP program would walk away from the medallions once the city took on that guarantee. In the overall market, I'll have Cheryl discuss medallion foreclosures.
Sure. Transfers that were based on foreclosure for fiscal year 2024, 300. If you go by calendar year 2024, it's 433. And this information is provided online, and the latest data will be reflected in our newest Office of Financial Stability report.
Thank you. Shifting to the e-hail program, the TLC is operating an e-hail program for passengers to use TLC license apps to hail yellow and green taxis. TLC has previously testified positively about this program, and we'd like to have an update about its progress and the TLC's views towards its future.
So the eHealth FlexPair program has recently been made permanent. This provides a lot of flexibility for drivers to get more trips in addition to street hails. This has been an overwhelming supported program where individuals can not only get, again, street hails, but also more e-hail trips. As a total, depending on the month, now e-hail trips incorporate about 5 to 10% of all taxi trips. And so this is a good thing for the industry to have more opportunity to make more income and to provide more flexibility for many of our individual drivers.
Have you done any further analysis on e-hail's effect on driver revenue?
Yeah, so overall, right, with the meter rate increase and with overall more options for drivers, New fare box revenue for drivers have increased up to 40%.
So from your vantage point, do you feel it's improving the situation for drivers?
I think it is.
Okay. And you don't feel it's putting downward pressure on the fares?
Again, this is more flexibility. It is a driver's choice. If they want to take e-hail trips, that's up to them. They're not forced to take these trips. And at the end of the day, this provides more flexibility and more trips overall. If there is a lot of, let's say, street hails, then many of the drivers would go that route and not take e-hail. And so that's up to them. But we continually monitor the overall market to ensure that drivers are receiving a fair base minimum pay for both sectors.
And since it's optional, do you feel that those who do not participate are negatively affected at all, the drivers?
Again, it's a market-based decision for the drivers. If they see that there is a lot of street hails, right, then that might be a decision that they want to make for themselves. Some drivers, for example, only do airport trips because that makes the most economic sense for them. Some drivers only do CBD trips because it makes most economic sense. And some drivers, right, in other sectors only do dispatches from an app.
When I ask questions on congestion pricing, I do want to touch on what you just said in terms of the CBD piece. Does the TLC have an intention to expand the program in the future, both in terms of its scope or in terms of bringing more drivers into this ecosystem?
I think right now we have an overall program that works, and we continue to monitor it. And I have not heard a lot of, I guess, complaints about the program in the last few months since the e-hail program was passed.
So do you envision expanding the program?
It's
TBD?
Well, it is available for all yellow drivers at this point.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
But in terms of the scope of the program, do you intend to expand that at all?
We can look at other things, including minimum trip pay, driver pay on the e-hail platforms, and things like that. But this is an official program of the TLC, and it continues to operate in its full capacity.
Moving to accessibility, in the past, TLC has emphasized that improving accessible and equitable service is a top priority for the Commission. Currently, there are approximately 9,500 wheelchair accessible vehicles, an 18% increase from the previous fiscal year. The Mayor's Management Report notes that the growth is due to the expansion of the TLC's accessibility regulations for FHBs. How is the TLC ensuring that the yellow cab industry continually expands and increases the number of wheelchair accessible taxis in its fleet?
Councilmember, accessibility is one of our prime priorities that we work through on a regular basis. We meet with our partners. We ensure that what we do reflects really the intent and with support of our advocacy communities. We work with them on our most recent regulations, and we continue to work with them moving forward. We are very proud that we're close to the 50% mandate of active taxis, and we likely will meet that in March of this year. Right now, the yellow fleet is at 44.8%, which roughly is about 4,235, a little bit more. And then on the other side, the FHV industry, there are 7,571 wheelchair accessible vehicles. And so right now, the incentive on the FHV industry is that the only way to get a TLC licensed vehicle is to get a wheelchair accessible vehicle. And so we truly believe that the structures and the incentives that are in place are strong enough to help with the conversions. And we're looking at the TIF funds and then also altering some of those incentives to provide more upfront monies to help with conversions on the yellow fleet as well.
What kind of assistance does TLC provide to drivers who are converting to accessible vehicles?
In the current state, we provide $14,000 plus quarterly payments of $1,000 if they make a certain number of trips per quarter. In addition to that, currently, and I say currently because a lot of these things are in consideration to be changed, drivers who drive a wheelchair accessible vehicle also receive a $1 incentive per trip. And so there's also, well, overall, those are the incentives in place to help drivers convert and take trips that are wheelchair accessible.
Overall, we've seen a faster adoption of accessible vehicles in FHVs than yellow cabs. What is the cause of this disparity? What problems do yellow cab owners encounter when converting to the wheelchair accessible vehicles?
Yeah, like I said in my testimony, council member, the yellow industry is only 50% recovered, right? Where the FHV industry by revenue is recovered completely, and by trips about 90 to 95%. And so there are some industry dynamics in the yellow sector that I continue to evaluate and look at. In addition, within our rules, we have also made sure that on the FHV side that the waves are also ADA compliant. Previously, that was not the case. And so we're continuing to make sure that there are more options out there and more consistency within the regulations so that there are more converters. Hopefully with more converters, there is more competition in the marketplace to provide drivers, owners, and fleets with a cheaper wheelchair accessible option.
What is the current citywide average wait for accessible dispatches for yellow cabs when compared to FHVs?
I don't know if I have that right in front. Actually, Evan does. Give us a second, we're gonna look it up. Go ahead and put. So we're going to talk about the accessible dispatch program, which is the yellow program.
Yeah, we have it for accessible dispatch. I don't believe we have it for FHVs. For accessible dispatch, it has decreased by over 1 minute from last year. It's down to 11 minutes and 17 seconds. We do not have it for FHVs.
And I can speak
We
to
just
FHVs
actually-
though.
Standards we're coming up with.
So again, within the FHV sector, while I don't have those data points, we have regulations around that. Previously, we had regulations that 90% of trips are done within 15 minutes or less, 80% within 10 minutes or less. Recently, we changed the rules to ensure that we meet the demand for wheelchair accessible vehicles in a much faster time frame, which is 90% within 10 minutes or less.
Thank you. And just quickly going to pivot to congestion pricing, and then I'm going to yield for my colleagues to ask questions. Congestion pricing will likely be passed down to consumers in the form of increased fares. Will this drive down passenger demand, or have you noticed that it negatively impacting the industry?
So actually, council member, we've seen for the data, we don't have that much data yet. It's only been 30 days since we put in congestion pricing as a city. However, the early data shows us that actually taxi trips have increased by 10% in the month of January compared to January 2024. and FHV trips have remained relatively the same. And there's some fluctuations, but in the FHV industry, we see a 1% decline in overall trips. And I think this is, again, natural growth of the industry, and then also, some relatively weird things in the data. And so we want to look at a longer period of time versus just 1 week of time. Generally, the city's DOT looks at this data and provides it, and then also works with the MTA as they are the agency that is working directly on these subjects.
And to clarify what you just said, you're saying the FHV trips remained the same, but there was a 1%
So,
decline?
relatively the same, right? It was about
Okay.
a 1%.
So it hasn't remained the same, they've seen a slight decline of 1%, but
But it
the
just like
yellow
this could
cabs
be
have gone up.
fluctuation. Yeah, it could be many different fluctuations in that data. This is a week's time, and so week over week, year over year, the data can be a little bit unclear.
And with congestion pricing, considering this new surcharge, has there been a noticeable increase in the cost per trip?
As you mentioned, right, we worked with the industry, we work with a variety of different stakeholders to ensure that it wasn't $9, right, per trip, or even 15 at that point. And where we landed on for high volume FHV trips, it was going to be, now in this new iteration, $1.50 for high volume FHVs like Uber and Lyft. For community car bases, it's 75 cents. For black car bases, it's 75 cents. For yellow taxis, it's 75 cents.
But earlier in your response to another question, you said drivers make their independent decisions on what type of trips they want to take, and some may find that there's an incentive of going into the CBD. What would that incentive be for them?
So the incentive of going into the CBD, I think we know in the initial data that you can get more trips faster. You can move through the CBD on average before congestion pricing for a long period. The speeds of this congestion relief zone was much slower. And so if you can move faster, if you can get passengers to your destination just a little bit quicker, it means that you get a little bit more free time now to search for that next fare instead of waiting in traffic.
The congestion price and surcharge for yellow taxi, green cabs, and black cars is 75 cents for each trip into, out of, and within the congestion relief zone, while the surcharge is $1.50 per trip for Uber and Lyft. Just wanting to see, again, going back to that incentive, is it just really time-based that incentivizes them to go in there, or do you find that in addition to these surcharges, is there another layer, to the cost per trip?
It's also customer behavior. I think on the opposite side, if they're leaving their private cars at home, potentially they are going to look at other options, including FHVs and TLC vehicles in general.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Majority Leader Farias, followed by Councilmember De La Rosa, followed by Councilmember Narcisse.
Thank you, Chair. Just some quick questions around my bill on Intro 676. How many electric FHVs are currently licensed by the TLC?
It's about 12,000 council members.
And what has been the reception to the Green Rise initiative? How has the program been implemented? I know you spoke a little bit about it in the testimony.
Yeah, so, again, we're incredibly proud of our sustainability efforts to get to 100% of trips dispatched to a wheelchair-accessible vehicle or a wheelchair-accessible vehicle, or EV, by 2030. We hope by then there will be an electric wheelchair-accessible vehicle that we can adopt into the rules. But overall, we are meeting our goals 2 years ahead of schedule. By the end of 2025, we were thinking 15%. Now 1 in 5 trips in New York City is either wheelchair accessible or electric. And that's a good thing for our city. We hope to continue that and exceed expectations and even meet those guidelines earlier.
And what are the top line points from the TLC's newly released report titled Electrification in Motion, an update on New York City's electric FHV fleet?
So the big things, right, is that we have been working with our partners to ensure better, faster charging across all 5 boroughs. What we looked in there, we saw that, hey, there is a need for data. And so what we recently published was a map of where drivers live by census block, right? So now if the New York Power Authority needs to see where they should be charging vehicles, they can look at that map. Or if DOT needs to know where level 2 curbside charging needs to be, the mayor just recently announced a 600 new level 2 charging in neighborhoods where drivers live. That's going to be available. And so overall, we have made consistent progress towards our sustainability and environmental goals and our WAVE goals. And so that is what we're celebrating within that report. But there's a lot more work to be done, right? And, you know, what that report also says is that when we implemented the Green Rise report, there was only 280 fast charging stations. In a year and several months later, we now have an additional 200 fast charging built by private entities, the Port Authority, and others. And this is going to take a real whole of government effort to make sure that we can transition to a more green and more sustainable future.
Chair, one last question, if I may. Thank you. And then what is TLC doing right now to study how to bring wheelchair-accessible electric vehicles into the market? Have you considered conducting a Taxi of Tomorrow-like competition to promote the development of wheelchair-accessible electric vehicles in the U.S. market?
Yeah, we have engaged with a variety of different manufacturers, with medallion owners, to really look at what the future of wheelchair accessible electric vehicles are. Currently, when I speak with manufacturers, this is not something that really there is a pressing a mode for them to push towards, right? They tell me that there is not a market, and I show them New York City, right? I show them that there's 100,000 vehicles, that there is truly a market, and they just don't believe me yet. But we are always working with our manufacturers to educate them about the biggest for-hire fleet in the U.S. so that we can make that transition. But as our rules continue to mature, we hope, right, with more EVs, with more wheelchair-accessible vehicles, that there is a synergistic future for an EV wheelchair-accessible vehicle.
Do you think including wheelchair accessibility in this proposal for my bill would be welcomed by the TLC? Like the study part?
Which proposal, ADA or?
Yeah, studying wheelchair accessibility.
Yeah, I mean,
electric
again,
vehicles.
council member, with the, I think that is incredibly important to really think about the shape of the overall picture of the fleet. We can't just look at one side of it. We have to look at both sides of it together. But, you know, we can work one-on-one. We can work individually to see where my reports that we published over the last 2 years might be missing, and continue to work with you to add that to our reports.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you so much for the
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Councilmember De La Rosa, followed by Councilmember Narcisse, followed by Councilmember Banks.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner, what legal powers does the city have in regulating the insurance market for taxi drivers and for hire vehicles?
Yeah, so most regulations are left to the state level, but the TLC can always make it a little bit more stringent. And in this case, we made it more stringent to go, well, a TLC before me made it more stringent in the 1990s from 50,000 to 200,000 in additional PIP.
PIP insurance is often cited as being more susceptible to fraud than other types of insurance. Can you explain if that is the case in your experience and why? And what steps has the city taken to mitigate this risk?
Yeah, I think overall, again, the enforcement mechanisms are with the state DFS, which is the Department of Financial Services run by Superintendent Harris. She has done an amazing job at not only gathering stakeholders like yourself, but looking at an overall policy that would get us to a better place with the American Transit Insurance Company. She recently proposed 3 proposals within the state budget that provides some of that, I guess, some of the changes necessary to get to a better place. And so we support that. I think if you can repeat your specific question one more time, Councilmember.
My question is, what steps has the city taken to mitigate the risk of fraud?
Yeah, so
With PIP.
in addition to that, I think to reverse the question a little bit, when I talk to stakeholders, right, what they have told me is that really, those who are operating in these fraudulent enterprises, right? Even if the PIP went from 200 to 50,000, one recent article in Insurance Insider stated that they would just cause more crashes to reach the profit margins that they need from even if PIP went from 200,000 to 50,000.
Okay, I look forward to speaking more about that. Chair, I have one more question. That's okay. The New York PIP system is in crisis with over 70% of the market covered by insolvent companies. Approximately half of the country doesn't have no-fault system for hire vehicles. Are there any of these states that don't have no-fault facing a crisis in their insurance systems, to your knowledge?
Again, I'm not an insurance regulator. I'm a for-hire market regulator, but I think where we need to look at the differences, right, is that New York City is a whole different creature than any other city, any other state in the country. We have a more professionalized driving force that operates full-time, 32 plus hours a week. Many other cities, especially outside of New York City, really operate in a different manner. They operate as gig workers, part-time. And so that's why we have so many different regulations to protect drivers in New York City. For example, minimum driver pay.
Good morning. I'm always happy to see you. When we're talking about yellow cabs, especially in New York City and all taxi, we know that a lot of immigrant folks, that's how they raise their kids. I'm a beneficiary of that because my father drove taxi, yellow cab for many decades in New York City. And I'm sure it's not only me, it's many others that benefit. So now they're having a hardship. We know that for a fact, right? That for them to retire their vehicle, right? It's gonna be very hard on them. They've been through a lot in this process. Not your fault, actually. But with the March 31st, 2025 deadline, right, approaching, how close is the city how close is the city to reaching the goal of having 50% of the active yellow taxi fleet wheelchair accessible? And what challenges remain in meeting this requirement?
Yeah. Well, Councilmember Narcisse, thank you so much for your commitment and your work for a better for-hire industry. I really appreciate that. I think to your first point is that, this was we want to provide relief for drivers with their vehicle retirement extensions. But to meet the court-mandated order, we can't do that anymore. We can't do VREs as much as I want, right, to support our drivers and our yellow industry. And so, we're getting closer. We're at 44.8% of the fleet for March of 2025. What is going to be more hard is the court mandated order for 2028. We are only about 30% of the way there for the entire authorized fleet. And so, you know, there is going to be a lot of work that I need to do with our industry to ensure that we have a pathway there. And that's why we're looking at a variety of different changes to the program so that more drivers can have more upfront more upfront payments and their hack-up costs so that they can actually afford these vehicles, wheelchair accessible vehicles that may cost upwards of $75,000. We've also worked hard to get more converters into this into the yellow space, and we've recently added 2 more converters that meet drivers where they are, right? And what I mean by that is that, you know, typically fleets have advantages when they do big purchase orders. In this case, the converters will take on one vehicle, convert that vehicle, instead of them having to go to other states like Indiana, that they can go somewhere closer like the suburbs of Philly.
Thank you. One of the things I was reading about, it's too early. We know that it's too early to have a data to see how congestion prices is affecting our fleets in New York City. But with the little that I know of from hearing from the drivers, they are very concerned. But hearing from you, you said there is kind of a trend, I say, that may more likely probably improve, is better for them. But in the meanwhile, they're having concerns.
Yeah.
What are you doing? Are you telling them this is A, B, I think it's better for you, but from the pocket, from their own pocket, they said that it's not good for them?
I think we have genuine concerns as well, right? When both the yellow industry and the FHV industry had paid billions into congestion charges before this one. $2.50, right, on the yellow side, plus another 50 cents, plus now another 75 cents. Those are big concerns. Those are added costs when you get into a yellow taxi. And so I have those concerns. And I think that the bigger picture, right, is that we need to work with the state to say, hey, you can't continue to use the for-hire vehicle industry as a piggy bank. You can't continue to say, okay, we'll charge $2.50, another 50 cents, and then another 75 cents. It has to stop somewhere. And the same with the FHV industry as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I know it's time. It's just a little personal. Thank you.
We're gonna have Councilmember Banks followed by Councilmember Ariola.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioner, and to the rest of the staff members for your testimony. When it comes to medallion value and financial viability, with the value of taxi medallions having plummeted from over 1 million to a fraction of that, what measures are being taken to address the financial burden on medallion owners, many of whom are struggling with debt? And are there any plans for debt relief or restructuring of the program to help subsidize this industry?
Yeah, thank you so much, Councilmember Banks. This is something that is incredibly important to the TLC. And one of the first things that I told not only the chair, but also the entire council was that I would get MRP and MRP Plus to the finish line. We got there in September of 2022. We held a big tent event where thousands of drivers, hundreds of drivers, now thousands of drivers, were able to come and get relief. Small medallion owners of 6 or less medallions, those who needed help the most. And we provided now over $471 million of debt relief. That's a good thing for New Yorkers, because where they were going to be was that their mortgages, their homes, their private cars were going to be taken away from them. But through this program and through the work with the council, we were able to say, okay, you know, you're a small medallion owner, you're struggling, let's get you some help. Let's get your payments down to $1,234 per month instead of, in some cases I heard, $5,000, right? Because a lot of our drivers still have to pay rent, a mortgage,
So
car
true.
payment, or other, sorry.
No, I said so true.
Yeah, and so we wanted to make sure that we can provide some relief, and further, that the bank couldn't go after them themselves, that they would come to the city instead.
All right, thank you. Madam Chair, just indulge me a couple of more minutes. Thank you. Competition for the higher vehicles, the FHVs, and the ride-hailing apps. How does the Taxi Limousine Commission, the TLC, plan to level the playing field between yellow cabs and for-hire vehicles? Example, the Uber, the Lyft, the Curb, Revel apps. Given the significant regulatory and operation disparities, and are there plans to impose similar surcharges, regulations for the FHVs to support the yellow cab industry?
Yeah. Like, as I look at the numbers, it concerns me that while the yellow industry has been recovering since the global pandemic, they were hit with a double whammy, like you said, right? With a medallion crisis in 2018, 2019, and then again with COVID-19. And so that's why we came up with the MRP Plus program. But to your question more specifically, how do we level the playing field? In recent months, we passed a regulation around flex fare or the e-hail, where now trips don't just come from street hails.
Right.
They now come from other areas, including an app from Curb and Arrow. So that for the first time, FHV, the taxi industry, could now have that flexibility to compete on that same level playing field. But we also need to look at the overall picture, and I think that there has been certain trends that have changed. That street hail culture is not what it used to be, and so we have to also recognize that. But from my numbers that I've shared today, I'm encouraged that people are seeing yellow as a prime opportunity to get them through and across our city.
All right, thank you. My last question before we go to the second round, Madam Chair, so I can get these questions out? Excellent. Technology integration. What steps is the TLC taking to modernize the yellow cab industry and integrate it into the technology space? For example, are there plans to develop or support a unified app that allows passengers to hail yellow cabs as easy as they can book ride-hailing services?
Yeah. I'm very proud to say that our yellow system is probably the most technologically advanced yellow system in the country. Not only does it have a TPAP technology system within the vehicle, but every single vehicle is connected to an app. Not a unified app,
Right.
but an app that works together. So Curb and Arrow work together. They're the most primary dominant apps in the industry. So when you get into a yellow taxi, you can either pay on your app, you can pair and pay, or you could do multiple things. In other jurisdictions, that just is not available. And so, we will continue to look at innovation in this space. We continue to work with the technology providers, the e-hail providers, to see what the next steps are. But part of it is providing Curb, Arrow, any other e-hail providers, just a little bit of flexibility so that they can innovate.
Thank you. We've been joined by Councilmember Rivera. We'll next hear from Minority Leader Ariola.
Thank you, Chair. We get a lot of thank you so much for coming to testify, and thank you for having such comprehensive answers. So we get a lot of complaints. I live right outside of JFK about taxi drivers being discriminatory when picking up wheelchair users, even though they are fitted for wheelchair accessibility. So what are you doing to prevent this discriminatory illegal practice? And in addition, for for-hire complaints, is the TLC planning to implement a procedure by which customers will be able to make a complaint for a for-hire vehicle when they refuse to pick them up after they accepted a ride? Because currently, as soon as they are they don't accept the ride, their name is taken from the app, so it makes it very difficult to make a complaint. And do you think that if someone does do this discriminatory act, should they then be able to pick up another person at the airport?
Yeah, thank you so much, Councilmember Ariola, for that. This is something that is incredibly important to the mission of the TLC, and I thank you that it's important to you and your constituents as well. At the airport, right? I can't be at every trip, every ride, and so what I depend on is from our community. Consumer complaints, right, is something that is an incredible tool for our public. Last year, we had 17,000 consumer complaints from anywhere from refusals to overcharges to many other things. And so we would take that driver into accountability and provide enforcement on that. But we also have an inspection station that inspects yellow cabs 3 times a year to ensure that their ramps work, to ensure that their lights work, to ensure that everything about that vehicle is in working order. And sometimes, right, things change once they leave our inspection facility. And so that's where I need the public. I have about 100 enforcement officers for 5 boroughs. And so, we focus a lot on JFK, but we always need the public's help. And we take these very seriously. And in the future, if there are refusals, where it's going to hurt our drivers is their time, right? And so they would have to take another education course to ensure that they are well educated on making sure that they have the proper seatbelts in the vehicles, the proper working ramps in the vehicles, and making sure that they take people with disabilities. And if they do not, they are going to be held to account.
And I get that, and that's with the yellow cabs, but with the apps, it's just, I think you need to work with those for hires that are doing things through apps, that they don't take the name out right away so that a complaint can be made. Thank you so much for your answer.
And I'm committed to working with the high volume for hire vehicles to making sure that we know who is the driver so that they don't cancel on people with disabilities. And I'll work with you as well, Councilmember. Thank you.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you. On insurance and liability coverage, Intro 1050, personal injury protection insurance, also known as no-fault insurance, is designed to cover medical expenses and lost wages for drivers and passengers injured in traffic collisions regardless of fault. New York City currently requires TLC vehicles to purchase $200,000 of PIP insurance coverage, 4 times greater than the $50,000 amount required by New York State. Why has the city set the PIP insurance coverage requirements for taxis and for hire vehicles higher than the state requirement?
Yeah, so passenger vehicles only operate a certain amount of time. Here, our TLC vehicles operate a lot more time. In some cases, some of these vehicles operate over a 24-hour period, depending on the 2 drivers renting out a yellow taxi, for example. And so we wanted to make sure, right, and this is a rule that was in place in the 90s, right, to ensure that all roadway users, passengers, drivers, are protected. These vehicles are on the road much longer than the average vehicle. In every other jurisdiction outside of New York City, these drivers don't operate in a full-time capacity like New York City TLC drivers. In addition, right, the PIP also allows for for claims to be paid out within 30 days or less, making sure that there's not this long legal process to ensure that people can get help for medical treatments or other types of treatments that they need right then and there.
How and why was the $200,000 requirement determined to be an adequate level?
So $200,000, again, was determined at that time. But like I said, these vehicles operate more than 4 times the average amount of a private passenger vehicle. And so the TLC at that time decided that $200,000 was the amount necessary, as these were full-time drivers.
American Transit Insurance Company currently provides PIP insurance to 60% of for-hire vehicles in the city and has recently reported in financial filings that it is insolvent. They have suggested that the $200,000 premium has incentivized fraudulent insurance claims. Has the TLC noticed many documented cases of PIP insurance fraud?
Yeah, the TLC is not an insurance regulator. We work with the State Department of Financial Services. We work with the governor's office on a regular basis to ensure that we look at all of these things. I appreciate the DFS for bringing together over 40 different stakeholders last year to look at the issues at hand. ATIC's insolvency did not happen overnight. It happened over a 30-year period, right? To reach $1 billion of insolvency means that, that they were playing the market for a very long time. They were undercutting their competitors. And so this is the first superintendent that is now saying, hey, enough is enough. I'm not gonna pass the buck down the road, that I could have swept this under the rug, but she's not doing that. She's taking this head on. And in the budget bill, there are 3 strong solutions that help us towards the first steps of getting a healthier market.
In TLC's opinion, does the city's higher PIP insurance rate make it more likely that there will be cases of insurance fraud? Again,
I don't have the data to suggest one way or the other. But what I know is that many people have told me that this is important for bicyclists, for pedestrians, for drivers, for passengers to be protected, so that in an event of a terrible crash, that many of these people can be paid for their injuries in a quick time period.
Does lowering the PIP insurance rate raise concerns that injured individuals will not be effectively compensated? Is the $50,000 coverage rate for injuries sustained in regular auto accidents sufficient in those cases?
Again, I've asked for data around this from the insurance providers, from our other partners, and I haven't seen that. What we do know, though, is the basics of it. Is that if there is a crash that happens and there is 6 or more people that were injured, like our Herald Square crash on Christmas Day, right? We know that $200,000 could be enough to cover big crashes like that. And so I just, where I see the biggest potential is the what-if scenarios.
Does TLC collect any data on PIP insurance claims in the city?
We do not collect, again, we're not the insurance regulator, so we don't have that authority, but what we do collect is information on registration and insurance that every single one of our drivers have. And so they have to meet the minimum coverage requirements that we set out before their vehicle is approved to operate.
So you have no line of sight in terms of how many claims exceeded the default $50,000 coverage rate?
Yeah, again, we're not an insurance regulator, so we don't get that data.
Does the TLC believe that the city's unique driving conditions warrant higher required coverage?
Like I said, and I want to be completely, level-headed and not say which way we should go, but I think that drivers are full-time drivers, and so they are different than other types of drivers on our roadways, and so there might need to be additional coverage requirements for vehicles that operate on the roadways a little bit longer.
If PIP insurance requirements were lowered, what would the savings look like for a typical driver?
So from my conversations, I've heard that it could save 5% on an annual basis. Again, I haven't seen that data. I haven't seen from the providers telling me that. I've also heard from others that say that any decreases might be absorbed by the insurance companies, or any decreases might not be rolled on to back to the driver, right? But 5% can represent about $400 to $600 on an annual basis.
If a pedestrian or a passenger gets injured in a taxi crash and coverage is lowered to $50,000, will the injured person have to cover injuries beyond $50,000 out of pocket?
Again, I'm not an insurance regulator or insurance provider, so I can't speak on that.
Okay. I'm going to allow Councilmember Banks to ask his final questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. When we talk about long-term vision, what is the long-term vision for the yellow cab industry in New York City? And how does the TLC plan to ensure that yellow cabs remain a viable and iconic part of the city's transportation ecosystem in the face of the ongoing challenges that they're facing?
Yeah. You know, one of, I think, the core values that I have for the entire industry is an industry that is, that serves, that is safe, that continues to provide people who need a for-hire vehicle an opportunity to get where they need to go in a timely manner. But within that, there needs to be accessibility, affordability, and safety for all roadway users. And, you know, my biggest vision for the entire for-hire industry is that everyone is looking for a pathway to the middle class, right, looking for opportunity for their families, for their kids to go on to college, to buy their first home, to, you know, do what they need to do to live the American dream. And that's what, you know, I really have as a core value for this industry.
Thank you. Congestion pricing. How is the TLC collaborating with city agencies such as the Department of Transportation to address issues like congestion pricing, the dedicated taxi lanes, and the other infrastructure improvements that could benefit the yellow cab industry? Yeah,
you know, I appreciate my partnership with Commissioner Rodriguez tremendously. He is someone who we remain in contact on a principal level on a regular basis. But we also have connections with the policy team, my policy team, and the DOT policy team to discuss the variety of different things. Things like taxi relief stands, right? Where do we need to put more taxi relief stands? This has been a close partnership that I incredibly appreciate. On the MTA side, we also work with the MTA, Jano's office, to really ensure the smooth implementation of the congestion pricing. And there have been small hiccups, right, of one or two drivers, but that is just an operational issue. Overall, the implementation has been, I would say, flawless.
All right, thank you. And my last question, when it comes to regulatory reforms, are there any plans to revise the regulatory framework governing the yellow cab industry to make it more competitive in the current transportation landscape? For example, could medallion requirements be adjusted to reduce costs for the owners?
Yeah, we're always working with our communities, including our advocacy community, to make sure that the yellow industry can continue their track to recovery, to stability, and to ensure its overall picture as the iconic yellow taxi of our city. Within the regulatory framework, we're always looking at how do we put on more innovations within the yellow industry. Last year, we made the FlexFare pilot permanent. We're looking within the technology system to ensure that we get more data on a regular basis so that we know where and when yellow taxis are operating, so that we can simply get a lost item, right? Simple like that, back to a passenger in a more efficient time frame. Or making sure that, that in the future there might be a more need for a taxi at a high volume event, be it a high volume event, be it at Madison Square Garden or one of our baseball stadiums, right? And to say, hey, there is high demand in a certain area of our city. And so, we have a sandbox that we're looking at a variety of different new ideas to ensure a more competitive for-hire industry for all New Yorkers.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. 2 questions on intro number 373. One, are drivers experiencing hardships that prevent them from retiring their vehicles? And I'm curious to know what that trend has been like.
Yeah, for over a 3-year period of time, we looked at vehicle retirement extensions and approved over 90% of those extensions. And so, it has come a time when, we have to say, hey, COVID is behind us. There are new rules and regulations in place and a court order that is in place. But for some drivers, I have still provided VREs exceptions to, but that's just one. Those who own one medallion, owners with one medallion or less can have a one-time 6-month extension. But I cannot do any more extensions. And why I can't do that is because if I provide an extension for a non-wheelchair accessible vehicle, that means, right, that it's going to delay a wheelchair accessible vehicle into the future. And so I can't do that. And on the other side, that wheelchair accessible vehicles no longer have a vehicle retirement age. And so as long as a wheelchair accessible vehicle passes inspection, it can continue to operate in New York City. But let me provide a little bit more data on that, and I'll turn it over to Cheryl.
Sure. Do you want me to break it down the last few years? During 2020, 689 applications were processed, 574 were granted. 2021, 809 were granted. 2022, 1,091 were granted. 2023, 1,301 were granted. 2024, 788 were granted. And since October, we changed the rule that it's only for an owner of one medallion for 6 months. So the numbers obviously have decreased.
Thank you for that. And how many vehicles would be impacted by this proposed legislation?
So there are 13,585 medallions. 4,500 of them are wheelchair accessible vehicles. Those can be kept on for as long as they can pass TLC inspection. And so if I did the math, it would be about 9,374. I hope I did the math correctly. That might can get a vehicle retirement extension.
Thank you. Thank you for your participation in today's hearing. We're going to move now to public testimony.
Thank you so much, Council Member, and thank you for the opportunity.
And we've been joined by PS 79 out of my home borough of Queens, hailing from Councilmember Palladino's district. Welcome, guys. I now open the hearing for public testimony. I remind members of the public that this is a government proceeding and that decorum shall be observed at all times. As such, members of the public shall remain silent at all times. The witness table is reserved for people who wish to testify. No video recording or photography is allowed from the witness table. Further, members of the public may not present audio or video recordings as testimony, but may submit transcripts of such recordings to the Sergeant-at-Arms for inclusion in the hearing record. If you wish to speak at today's hearing, please fill out an appearance card with the Sergeant-at-Arms and wait to be recognized. When recognized, you will have 2 minutes to speak on today's hearing topics: Oversight, TLC, the status of the yellow cab industry; Intro number 193, a local law to amend the administrative code of the City of New York in relation to requiring taxis and for hire vehicles to display a decal warning passengers to look for cyclists when opening the door; Intro number 373, a local law in relation to extending scheduled vehicle retirement dates for taxi cabs during the COVID-19 state disaster emergency and the repeal thereof; Intro number 676, a local law to amend the administrative code of the City of New York in relation to requiring the Taxi and Limousine Commission to conduct a study and report on increasing the use of electric for-hire vehicles and installing new charging infrastructure; Intro number 1050, a local law to amend the administrative code of the City of New York in relation to limiting the amount of liability coverage that the Taxi and Limousine Commission may require for vehicles it licenses; Proposed Reso 80A, calling on the New York State Legislature to pass and the New York State Governor to sign legislation that would create a surcharge for hire vehicles that would go towards funding the expansion of wheelchair accessible and all-electric FHVs. If you have a written statement or additional written testimony you wish to submit for the record, please provide a copy of that testimony to the Sergeant-at-Arms. You may also email written testimony to testimony@council.nyc.gov within 72 hours of this hearing. Audio and video recordings will not be accepted. I will now call the first panel: Jean Ryan, Iman Ramori Doster, and Robert Acevedo. Jean, you can start when you're ready.
Hi, I'm Jean Ryan, President of Disabled in Action of Metropolitan New York, DIA for short. DIA has been trying to get taxi access since 1996, when we founded Taxis for All campaign. That's 29 years, and we have heard every flimsy excuse in the book for why we do not have access when we're trying to hail a cab on the street, get picked up at the airport, or book a trip through an app or call. Years ago, we tried to get a law for 100% taxi access with the city council to no avail. It would not even go to committee, even though a large majority of council members endorsed it. We sued and got a legally binding agreement in federal court more than 10 years ago that by 2020, half the cabs would be wheelchair accessible. But it's 2025 and that goal has not been reached. Last year, Judge Daniels ordered the TLC to reach 50% accessibility again, And the TLC changed rules about length of ownership and mandatory buying of wheelchair-accessible vehicles. We believe that Intro 373-2024 would again not allow the TLC to reach 50% in a timely manner as they legally agreed to and are under court order to reach. Our disabilities, coupled with the fact that cab drivers need business, led the TLC to form Accessible Dispatch in 2018 so we can call or use an app to book a yellow cab trip. If the vehicle doesn't show up, we can call back and get a human. Accessible Dispatch has been a lifesaver for us, even though sometimes we have to wait 1 or 2 hours for a vehicle to show up. And now the TLC wants to ditch it. Why? We are asking the council for more funding to keep Accessible Dispatch and to ask the TLC why they do not enforce their own rule that drivers must pick us up. It takes only 4 to 5 minutes to secure us if drivers have the correct straps and knowledge. But drivers refuse to pick us up, refuse to secure us, and do not speak English so that we can safely communicate with them. Thank you.
Thank you. And just for the record, we're adding Julia Yedez to this panel. Yepez, excuse me.
Thank you for waiting.
No problem. I think you're next.
Hi, good morning. My name is Iman Ramawi Doster, and I am the Senior Community Organizer with the Disability Justice Program at New York Lawyers for the Public Interest. Thank you, council members, for allowing me to speak this morning. On February 6th, the state legislature had a joint transportation budget hearing, which included testimony from the New York State Department of Transportation, the MTA, and various organizations from all over the state. Ron Epstein, president and CEO of the New York Material Construction Association, talked about the need for the protection of our environment and the role electric vehicles can play in doing that, and a few people mentioned accessibility for people with disabilities like myself. Yet no one married the two. We need to talk about accessible transportation in a holistic way that includes everyone. Intentional language, including people with disabilities, matter. Why hasn't the TLC taken broader action to develop an accessible electric vehicle like when they did with the Taxis for Tomorrow in 2009? Why is the TLC conducting studies on the costs, challenges, and opportunities related to the use of electric for-hire vehicles without considering the need for accessibility? It's the responsibility of every government agency across New York State to ensure access for people with disabilities, including the TLC. New York Lawyers for the Public Interest strongly supports a council resolution in favor of a statewide surcharge on inaccessible Ubers and Lyft trips and the establishment of a green and accessible transportation authority to support accessibility and electrification in the for-hire vehicle and paratransit fleet. New York City is one of the largest markets in the world for multi-billion-dollar rideshare corporation Uber and Lyft. Our local government should take a proactive leadership role in requiring this industry to develop and adapt vehicles that are both fully accessible and zero emission. As someone who uses for-hire vehicles frequently through the MTA's Accessoride on-demand pilot program, and a person who uses manual wheelchairs for my residual limbs when they're sore or when my lupus is extra aggressive, which happens the more and more I get older, I can tell you that I am worried about wheelchair users being left out once again. Electric vehicles, cleaner air, and moving from fossil fuel combustion are vital to disabled New Yorkers. I, along with other advocates, want to be involved with this planning as they directly affect our lives and how much or little we can participate in work, school, doctor's appointments, social events, and more. Let's make our city more accessible, not less. That's the equitable thing to do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Robert?
Okay, my name is Robert Acevedo from Disabled in Action. As I testified at last month's virtual meeting, getting rid of accessible dispatch means getting rid of the human element, which is very important to many of the disabled and non-disabled, including many tourists. It's very important for the image of this city. I still think that this decision is about money and the results of the TLC being forced in court to do what they said in a previous settlement. As usual, the disabled are being penalized while being told that by the TLC that what they are doing is best for the disabled. Once again, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. As for an amendment requiring taxis and for hire vehicles to display a decal warning passengers to look for cyclists and e-scooters when opening the door, this is essential, as many disabled and non-disabled are endangered by these unlicensed cyclists and e-scooters. When discussing this amendment, the visually impaired and deaf should be mentioned as they are impacted by these unlicensed cyclists and e-scooters which refuse to make a sound announcing their impending arrival. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Julia?
Thank you. I live in the Little Caribbean section of Brooklyn, an area which is almost impossible to find a taxi. Our area has driver-owned gypsy cars who don't cater to wheelchairs and non-accessible dollar vans. We can call Lyft or Uber, but many of these do not want to accept wheelchair passengers. And if they do, their demeanor is rude, abusive, and or say they can't speak English, creating more stress and frustration, which always endangers my well-being. When I call accessible dispatch, I get service by humans. I can ask human-related questions from and about New Yorkers with disabilities. Accessible dispatch employs a New York-based disabled staff who also speaks and understands English. In short, accessible dispatch experiences and feels my needs. Seems that whenever people with disabilities find the door slightly open, that can make our day, job, or outing more fruitful and enjoyable, it starts to close once again before it completely opens. No one is above a disability-free future. Becoming disabled will always be an equal opportunity employer. The accessibilities we establish in our city today will be the ones you might use tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now hear from the next panel. Wen Chin, Richard Cho, Carmen Cruz, Allison Langley, Badhavi Desai, Semakara Sieges, whenever you're ready.
Hi, my name is Wayne Chen. Good morning, everyone. For PIP coverage, I think we should remain 200,000 because I own a medallion owner driver. You know, we need that coverage because we don't have worker compensation. In case I need injury in my job, the insurance cover provide, coverage for me in case I injure in my job, I lost income, So we need to keep the 200,000 coverage. And also for the wave vehicle accessible, TLC should increase the funding for the TIF because the wave vehicle costs like 80,000 right now. And in 2008, it cost 50,000. The cost increased. So they had to increase the funding for the wave vehicle for the medallion, and from 14,000 to at least 30,000, you know. And also for the medallion MRP program, my loan is not restructured yet because my bank refused to participate in the CD program, and our union looking for the new bank to buy out the loan. So the CD asked the CD and TLC to extend the program because the TLC chair said earlier, they said they ended on December last year. So the TLC and the CD should keep the program until all the medallion loan are restructured. You know, we had maybe about 200 loans left for medallion because most of the medallion owner, they are restructured already, but few owner, they had the loan not restructured yet because the bank, they refused to participate in the MRP program. So I asked the CD and the TLC to continue the program until all the medallion loan are restructured. So we are getting close to restructuring, so please continue the program. Thank you so much.
Hi, good morning, Madam Chair and everyone. My name is Richard Chow. I'm driving the taxi for 19 years. I'm an owner driver, member of the New York Taxi Workers Union. In 2001, me and a lot of drivers, 15-day hunger strike to win the MRP program. In 2013, I had an accident. Someone hit my cab. The guy hit me, TLC plate license 2. The other side insurance paid me the damage but by the young lady sitting in my cab, and she said she's pregnant, she lost a baby, she sued me, and she sued the American Transit, also sued the other side of the insurance. A few months later, they negotiate and close the case, and you can imagine how risky the lower the coverage of 50,000. If the serious big accident, I have to stay in the hospital for 1 to 2 weeks. I don't have a workers' compensation. I cannot walk. I cannot pay the expensive hospital bill. I can't walk. And then now yesterday I saw the news. I heard the news that the Super Bowl made 22 crash yesterday. You can imagine how dangerous is it. I cannot walk yesterday. I stay home. The city council pay no for insurance, lower the coverage from 200,000 to 50,000, saving the premium only $600 per year, give up 150,000 in coverage to the save $50 a month. It's a dangerous bill. The bill is very risky for the driver, personal access, medallion, my medallion, home, and property. Driver need more extra coverage to protect the driver without loss of job, and the driver can get the peace of mind to taking care of the family and let the driver survive. Thank you.
Buenos días, mi nombre es Carmen Cruz. Soy miembro de New York Taxi Workers Alianza. Tengo más de 11 años trabajando para Uber y Lyft.
She says, good morning, my name is Carmen Cruz. I'm a member of the New York Taxi Workers Alliance, and I have more than 11 years driving with Uber and Lyft.
Para empezar, no estamos interesados en ahorrar $50 mensuales en cobertura, porque esto pondríamos en riesgo, perderíamos $150,000, pondríamos en riesgo mucho por tan poco.
So to start off, I'd like to make clear that we as drivers are not interested in saving $600 a year if it's going to put at risk. It's simply not worth it to save such small amount of money for such a great risk and such a large amount of coverage.
$600 no es suficiente para todos los gastos que tenemos.
$600 of savings is not nearly enough for all of the costs that we are experiencing.
¿Por qué no mejor deciden estas dos empresas, participan, se ponen de acuerdo en darnos un aumento de pago? Eso sería una solución para todos los conductores, lo justo para nosotros.
A much better idea from the companies that are pushing these bills would be if these two companies would give us a pay raise to be able to pay for our expenses.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Allison Langley. I'm a staff attorney with the New York Taxi Workers Alliance. I'm here to testify about Intro 373, a bill which would have provided for vehicle retirement extensions during the COVID-19 crisis. While the COVID-19 state of emergency has ended, the economic crisis facing yellow cab owners has not. Yellow cabs are doing just 55% of the trips per day that they were doing before COVID. NYTWA urges the City Council to revisit the issue of helping drivers with vehicle expenses while they are struggling to bring in enough revenue to purchase a new car. The lack of post-COVID recovery has been exacerbated by the recent court order, which requires that all owner-drivers put a wheelchair-accessible vehicle or a wave on the road. The New York Taxi Workers Alliance supports the goal of an accessible fleet, and the transition must not be so costly that it pushes drivers out of the industry. A wave, as you heard from Wayne Chin, is twice as expensive as a standard vehicle. Owner-drivers need financial support from the city. Otherwise, the court order will not result in increasing the number of accessible cabs on the street. It will simply reduce the overall number of cabs in operation overall. While the Taxi and Limousine Commission does provide some limited benefits from the Taxi Cab Improvement Fund, or TIF, which is funded by a surcharge on taxi trips, the fund not only fails to fully cover the difference in purchase and operational costs, but is going to become insolvent this year. You heard earlier today from the chair of the TLC as he testified about the limited funds available and the difficult decisions they had to make to try to increase the benefit up front. What he did not tell you is that even at the current benefit rates, the fund will be insolvent by the end of the year. In addition, while we appreciate the TLC's attempts to increase the upfront benefits to help drivers purchase vehicles, those increases come at the cost of reducing the overall benefit rate and the benefits that drivers would receive year after year of maintaining a wave in operation. NYTWA urges the City Council to find other funding to support owner drivers as they work to meet the accessibility mandate. This would allow TIF benefits not only to be maintained at their current level, which as I've said is insufficient, but also to increase it. This funding would not only ensure that thousands of drivers would be able to keep their jobs driving yellow cabs, but would also ensure that the many passengers who need an accessible taxi cab have access to one when they need it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the council. My name is Baidavi Desai. I'm the executive director of the 28,000-member New York Taxi Workers Alliance. First to speak on Intro 1050. We are really concerned because, as Wayne said, yellow cab owner drivers do not have workers' compensation coverage. And livery drivers only have workers' comp if the injury is a result of a crime or or it meets the statutory definition of grave injury. And so for livery drivers and yellow cab owner drivers, PIP, or no-fault insurance, it's a lifeline. It's critical. And we're talking about, instances of very serious injury. And as the commissioner testified earlier, compared to other insurances, it is the insurance that will deliver for you within a 30-day period. And as Carmen testified, telling drivers that they're going to save $400 to $600 a year if they give up this critical coverage, it's honestly such an insult. I think the real impetus for this bill is most likely that Uber and its paid-for coalition seems to believe that reducing this coverage is going to reduce the level of fraudulent claims. But there is no publicly available data There's no scientific report from the Department of Financial Services, certainly not the TLC, certainly not the City Council itself, or even from an insurance company or a watchdog group that would substantiate this claim. So we're being asked to reduce coverage with no evidence that it's even going to impact the fraudulent claims that, that it's supposed to aim. So we have a lot of concern and really call for a pause on, moving forward on this bill.
Thank you. And I think I'm missing someone up here. Samasera? Samasera? Okay. Thank you to this panel.
Thank you.
We'll now hear from the next panel. Freddie Goldstein, Jeff Berman, Peter Mazier, KJ Singh, Michael Ring. Get whenever you're ready, Freddie Goldstein.
Sorry. Okay. Good morning, Chair Brooks Powers and members of the committee. My name is Freddie Goldstein, and I'm testifying today in support of Intro 1050. This bill is really about the drivers. It is the drivers who pay for their insurance in New York City, and it is the drivers who bear the cost of unnecessary high insurance requirements. New York City for-hire vehicle drivers are required to carry 4 times more personal injury protection insurance than any other driver on the road. And yet TLC data tells us that their rate of serious crash is extremely low. In fact, in 2024, the TLC reported fewer than 1 serious crashes per month on average for for-hire vehicle drivers. Further, this coverage is largely duplicative. Uber and Lyft drivers are covered by the Black Car Fund, which pays out before personal injury protection. Since the Black Car Fund pays out first, drivers have even less need for PIP than other New York drivers. Additionally, passengers, pedestrians, and other drivers would be covered under a driver's liability insurance, which covers $100,000 per person and would not be impacted by this legislation. While we do not have data for New York City specifically, we know that in New York State, where we cover the insurance on behalf of drivers, 98% of settled claims were for under $50,000 for accidents from 2021 and 2022. New York City's for-hire vehicle market is in crisis, an issue that primarily must be addressed by the state. So far, the governor's solution is for insurers to raise rates. Since 2024, drivers have already seen anywhere from a 10 to 20% increase on average. The governor's budget makes clear this is just the beginning. Drivers will continue to see large rate increases for years to come. Reducing PIP requirements from $200,000 to $50,000 per person is the only related action the council can take, and it would save drivers around $600 annually. I hope you pass 1050 on behalf of drivers, riders, and the millions of New Yorkers who rely on for-hire vehicles. Thank you for your time.
Good morning, members of the committee. My name is Peter Mazer, and I am General Counsel to the Metropolitan Taxicab Board of Trade, a 72-year-old trade association representing owners and operators of licensed medallion taxicabs. Our full-service driver centers provided representation of drivers leasing cabs in more than 12,000 adjudications. The New York City medallion industry is an integral part of the city's mass transportation system. We service areas not reachable by bus and subway, yet we receive not a penny in government subsidy. In fact, each passenger riding a cab in the central business district of Manhattan already pays $3.75 of its fare to the MTA. That's more than the cost of a bus and subway ride. And while our ridership has been down in the industry, expenses have continued to increase, and today I want to address 2 areas where the City Council can be of help. Cabs and other vehicles for hire must maintain higher liability and no-fault insurance limits than other vehicles licensed in New York State. This is because of TLC regulations, which you've heard about already. However, these higher limits of insurance have been a magnet for fraud on the part of unscrupulous claimants, their medical providers, and unethical attorneys. The fraud is so rampant that it has jeopardized the stability of the for-hire insurance industry. The high cost of insurance premiums has been devastating to the taxi industry. Recently, both Uber and a major insurance carrier in the for-hire industry have filed separate lawsuits in federal court against some of these perpetrators. These suits highlight the types of fraudulent claim activity burdening for-hire vehicle insurance carriers and the scope of the problem. Lowering mandatory minimum insurance limits to those applicable to other vehicles, including for-hire vehicles elsewhere in the state, would discourage some of these fraudulent practices. Intro 1050, under consideration today, would help achieve this result by prohibiting the TLC from mandating higher limits. Persons injured in accidents would still be protected, as the TLC and the state both strictly enforce and mandate insurance coverage. We urge the passage of Intro 1050. If I can just
ask that you wrap up, please.
Yeah, if I could just have one more minute, just to address the concern that we had with the high cost of accessible vehicles, which are up to $90,000 each, and the fact that the Taxi and Limousine Commission has provided some funding, but is eliminating a large amount of the funding that's available, including subsidies to drivers, continuing payments to owners, and deadhead money that was available to drivers who transport passengers with accessibilities, and the elimination of the accessible dispatch program, which members of the accessible community have already talked about. We urge the City Council to find some funding that could restore some of these cuts.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we ask that if folks have more testimony beyond the 2 minutes, you can definitely submit the remaining testimony in writing. I have yours, so I'll be able to read it with more intent. Thank you. Microphone, please.
There we go. Chair Brooks Power, members of the committee, I'm Jeff Berman, Director of Public Policy at Lyft. Nice to speak to you this afternoon. I'd also like to express my gratitude to Councilmember Carmen de la Rosa for her leadership in sponsoring this critical legislation. As you've heard, currently TLC drivers are required to carry $200,000 in PIP coverage, 4 times the amount for TNC drivers and personal call drivers throughout the rest of New York State. That's a requirement. There's nothing, if the coverage limit is lowered to $50,000, that would prevent somebody who feels they want more coverage from buying more. We're simply saying eliminate the requirement. The excess requirement places an undue financial burden on for-hire vehicle drivers, making it increasingly difficult for them to afford necessary insurance premiums. Lowering the PIP requirement to $50,000 would align TLC coverage with that of other rideshare drivers and personal vehicle owners, reducing costs for drivers while maintaining sufficient protection in 3 ways. It would reduce duplication of coverage. As you've heard, for-hire vehicle drivers in New York already receive benefits largely duplicative of PIP coverage through the Black Car Fund or through workers' compensation. It would combat insurance fraud. The high no-fault limits incentivize fraudulent claims, which drive up costs for insurers and in turn for drivers. Lowering the limits would help mitigate these abuses. And it would encourage market competition. The diminishing availability of commercial auto insurance in New York City poses a growing risk to the industry. Excessive insurance requirements discourage new carriers from entering the market, reducing competition and further increasing costs. A reduction in PIP requirements would help stabilize the market and create more affordable insurance for drivers. The current state of commercial auto insurance in New York City creates significant challenges for for-hire vehicle drivers, including Uber, Lyft, and yellow taxis. While no single policy solution will change or fully resolve these challenges, lowering these requirements is smart, practical, and necessary. I urge the City Council to support this important reform to bring much-needed relief to licensed drivers. Thank you for your time and consideration.
How do you see this bill combating fraud?
The way it's been explained to me is that when you have coverage limits that are higher than needed, there's now a pot of money that nefarious actors find alluring and try to go after.
And who would those actors be? Is it the driver or the victim?
The alleged victim or their attorneys.
Now, in the instance where, as the commissioner used the example earlier in terms of the Times Square crash, and there were about 6 victims in that crash that no one anticipated happening, do you think that $50,000 would cover the 6 victims sufficiently?
First of all, there's the Black Car Fund, which covers, which provides significant coverage for death or bodily injury. So
The Black Car Fund insurance covers what exactly?
I don't want to speak out of turn, but what I know is that there's a $100,000 driver death benefit. There's illness insurance. There's lost wages
But for
insurance.
the passenger or a pedestrian that is involved in a crash, does that insurance fund cover them?
I can answer this.
Please.
The Black Car Fund is specific to the driver, so it would not cover injured passengers or pedestrians, but the liability insurance would. So there's $100,000 per person available from that pot of insurance. And I just want to clarify that with the PIP reduction, the $50,000 would be available per person. It wouldn't be expected to cover all 6 through one $50,000 pot.
Which is fine, but if there's a severe injury, and I think back to Commissioner Curry, the commissioner for the mayor's office for people with disabilities, and her injuries that were sustained from a crash within a FHV, actually, those were long and enduring impacts that she received through that crash. And so the doctor's visits well exceeded $50,000. So what gets activated? And I would argue it goes past $150,000. So what else is in the, what else are the drivers able to use to be able to cover this so that it doesn't kick over to someone who, was a victim in it all?
If I could, in other states, including the rest of New York State, if somebody's injured and passes away, a passenger or a pedestrian, the cost to their life and their medical injuries is no different than in New York City, or certainly not 4 times much as so. And so I think the problem here is if you're requiring people to buy a level of insurance that only applies to the outlier case and requiring the other 90-some% of people to purchase excessive coverage.
And if I may add one thing to this mix, the $200,000 coverage in PIP is not available to pedestrians. It's only available to passengers, to motorists and other vehicles. Pedestrians are limited to $50,000 in PIP coverage.
Thank you for that clarification, even though I am focused on all, but thank you for that clarification. Does liability insurance cover riders and pedestrians when the driver is not at fault?
Well, I'll answer that. No fault is exactly what it says. It covers everybody that's eligible to be covered, irrespective of fault. So if you're in a cab and the other motorist is at fault, no fault will cover you. If you're a pedestrian, whichever car was involved in, you don't have to determine who was at fault. Did the car go through a red light, or did this car make a turn? Did this car come too close to me? If you're hit, you'll be covered, and it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter. We don't assess liability. That's the whole point of no fault.
And the panel before this panel were a panel that included drivers that were clear that they did not feel that this would be helpful. They had concerns about what that meant for them in the event of a crash. And so hearing from the drivers directly, I just want to give an opportunity for you to respond to the concerns that they raised.
I was listening to them, and my reaction was that oftentimes people purchase insurance beyond the limit of what they're required to purchase because they feel that they would rather spend more money and lower their risk even for an unlikely event, and people are welcome to do that. What we're talking about is what the required minimum coverage is, not putting a cap on some maximum. So if you're a driver who wants to make sure you're covered for some unlikely scenario, you can purchase more insurance.
Even though the mass amount of drivers, if they're not required, will likely not, because there are some that would like to cut costs. But then that goes into my next
I
question.
agree with you. That's why the bill would be a good thing.
So my next question is, if we were to reduce no-fault insurance, then does that put passengers at more risk?
No, because we believe that there is both sufficient additional coverage through liability, which would cover in the question you were asking about earlier, liability would step in and cover.
And that's
in
the
that case.
100,000?
Yes, and then there's also the uninsured, underinsured motorist coverage that is available to passengers. And
Do you have an idea of what the cost is for an emergency room visit on average?
I don't have that information, no.
I do, since I recently experienced it. A cost for an emergency room visit is about $1,000.
$1,000.
For a visit, if you, not if you're staying overnight.
Right, and then do you know if you have to stay overnight?
Well, I spent 2 nights in the hospital a few months ago, and the official bill from the hospital was $27,000.
And that was for 2 days?
For 2 days.
Okay.
It wasn't a car accident.
Right, it wasn't a car accident, it was for 2 days. But if someone gets into a car crash with severe bodily injury and they have to be in a hospital for 5 days and then go to therapy,
Once the 50,000 in PIP, let's say 50,000 in PIP was exhausted, they would be able to bring the lawsuit and cover under the liability policy, which is 100 over 300,000. So you have additional coverage there, and that coverage you would have to show a significant injury. So if you reach the $50,000 threshold, you may be able to show significant injury. So that liability insurance is still available, but there you would have to depend on fault. So then you would have to bring the action against the person who was at fault, as opposed to no fault coverage, which only covers out-of-pocket medical expenses. It covers physical therapy. There is some money for lost wages. It's intended to provide a base level of coverage irrespective of fault. Before, in New York, many years ago, did not have no fault, and every time you were involved in an automobile accident, you brought a lawsuit, and the lawsuit would determine, the purpose of the lawsuit was to determine who was at fault, and the party that was at fault would wind up paying through their insurance carrier. No fault was supposed to create a system where we did not have the difficulty of assessing fault, and everybody would have a certain amount of coverage, 50,000 across the board. Now, if you got hit by a UPS truck, you'd have the same no-fault coverage. If you if you had the misfortune of being in an accident in a taxi cab in Yonkers as opposed to the Bronx, the coverage would be $50,000. And there is other coverage, like I said, there is the liability coverage.
Thank you for that. Mr. Singh?
Hello, my name is KJ Singh. I'm President and Chief Operating Officer of Maya Assurance Company. We are one of the few remaining insurance carriers providing liability insurance for the for-hire vehicle.
Can you move the mic closer to you, please?
We started about 20 years ago in a small office in New York City with no desk office or employees, and we provided insurance liability for the for-hire vehicle. It was 100% of our book of business, and we successfully have tried to do that. However, with the difficulty with the no-fault abuse, it has become very difficult. So approximately 5 years ago, we had decided to make the difficult decision to pull out of New York City for-hire vehicle insurance industry. The reason being, it was the no-fault abuse that was getting us. So the solutions for a policy limit and or regulation adjustment, I believe, do need to be discussed at the same time. Unfortunately, the hardworking taxi drivers are targeted for their insurance policies. They are specifically targeted with stage accidents for the passengers. The drivers themselves do have protection, and they do need protection because they are targeted. The abuse starts at the claim level of the passengers. So the decision or the discussion to have a reduction in policy limit is to limit the no-fault abuse. If the no-fault abuse was curtailed, minimum limits could be an option, 100, 300 could be an option, or even the bigger policy limits could be an option for protection of the drivers the passengers, the public, and the community, because that's what insurance does. I'm not here to, I'll be honest with you, as an insurance carrier, policy limits are easy. It's an acceptable decision we make to write. Would 2550 make it easier for other carriers to enter? I believe so. For our specific example, I'm on my 10th life of my 9 lives right now with conversations with DFS, so I don't know if that's going to be beneficial with an increase or decrease in limits right now. The targeted no-fault abuse is the issue. Thank you. And you had
Thank
previous
you.
no-fault questions. I can more than happy to answer some of those if you have any.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Michael Ring.
Hi, my name is Michael Ring. I'm Vice President of Disabled in Action. Disabled in Action is one of the organizations that was the plaintiff in the lawsuit that got 50% of the yellow taxis to be accessible. And that's great. But the big problem is that the drivers have no incentive to stop and pick someone up who's using a wheelchair. If they know what they're doing, it's going to take 3 to 5 minutes to secure a wheelchair, and they don't get any extra money for that 5 minutes in, 5 minutes out. But many of them claim they don't know how to secure a wheelchair, and I hear that so many times when I travel with my friends that use wheelchairs that I believe them. Their training is insufficient. I'm not sure if they've been taught how to secure a wheelchair. They often don't have the equipment in the back of their car to do it. They don't think someone needs to wear a seatbelt if their wheelchair is secured, but they can pop right out of the wheelchair if they stop fast. It's very dangerous. So there needs to be some more incentives to get the drivers to stop for people that use wheelchairs. Accessible dispatch is the answer for that. The drivers that sign up for that will be told that their passenger is using a wheelchair and they should get some extra money to make that trip and pick someone up in a wheelchair. And accessible dispatch shouldn't be replaced by app-based services, because I don't know if anyone's ever tried to communicate with Uber. You get an AI robot helping you, and that's not helpful if you need someone who lives in New York and understands New York like accessible dispatch does. That's all I had to say. But sitting on this panel, 2 years ago, I was in my Uber was totaled. I was fine. We were on North Conduit Boulevard. Now I understand why half a dozen people threw their lawyers' business cards at me. And I didn't sue anyone, but now it all makes sense to me.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the panel. Next, we're going to go online. We will hear first from Matt Doss, followed by Eric McClure.
Okay. Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Hi. Hi, Chair Brooks Powers. Good to see you. And the members of the committee. My name is Matt Doss. I am the former longest-serving New York City Taxi and Limousine Commissioner and Chair. I also was the General Counsel of the TLC at the time that these rules involving 1050s, Intro 1050, were passed. I'm now Transportation Technology Chair at the City University of New York at City College, where we have a research center that's USDOT funded, doing research on this very issue. So I'm here today to give you a little bit of a short preview on where we stand with our study that I've shared with not only you, but also the bill sponsor, Councilmember De La Rosa, and Councilmember Farias. I've been talking about the methodology, and I heard there were some questions earlier on the panel. I didn't watch all the testimony, but as to whether we have an objective study or anybody looking at this, the answer is yes. The UTRC has all of the region's top scholars from all of the universities that have transportation programs, and we are putting the finishing touches on a report which should be out specifically on reforms, root causes, and steps forward and recommendations for trying to solve and alleviate the insurance crisis in New York City specifically. We have the methodology includes looking at data. It looks at, we've been in touch with all types of stakeholders in the industry, and we're reaching out to more to get their perspectives and information. This is an incredibly complex issue. I was the general counsel. I wasn't the decision maker, but I drafted the rules along with Mr. Mazur, who testified earlier as my deputy at the time, we passed these rules along with the liabilities as part of the 1998 reforms. And just a bit of history, there was a lot of controversy surrounding them. There was a taxi strike. I think the Taxi Workers Alliance was actually formed at that time along with
Your
every
time has expired. Thank you.
Could I just have 1 second to wrap up, please?
If you could, please.
Yes, we will have our comments and our recommendations out, and I would encourage you to read them, but one of the ones that we're looking at now is, and I can share with you, is that we definitely support Intro 1050 because this is a recommendation that is one part of the problem. It's a judgment call. You know, it's not going to solve the problem completely, but is a step in the right direction. And we've had 25 years of inaction, and we have an insurance crisis that needs to be solved. There's a lot of misinformation, which I'll try to, I'm going to submit written comments responding that I hope you will read before the deadline is up. There's a lot of misinformation that has been shared here today. Reg 68 and a lot of the laws that are in place and all the different forms of compensation, including private compensation for private health insurance, is available for people. The number of people in our conclusions is very limited that benefit from this additional PIP. Additional PIP was designed for motorists who want to protect their families and buy it on top of what they have. Does not cover other pedestrians on the road, does not cover motorists and other vehicles, and the driver has ample insurance in most situations to cover their medical benefits. It does not cover pain and suffering. It is only for medical expenses, and it's only for lost wages and other types of benefits that are covered by the funds, private insurance, Obamacare. There's so few people that have ever, in our experience, reached the upper levels of the 200,000. It's a judgment call that you need to make, but if it was up to me, I would say that plus other reforms along with it will make a difference. It's not just about drivers saving some money in the short term. We need to mandate telematics and do a lot of other things. And I want to congratulate you, Chair, as well as I'd like to congratulate Councilmember De La Rosa for having the courage to move forward with this bill, because it's never a politically easy thing to do to reduce insurance. If we don't do this and other things, we're not going to have jobs or an industry to serve the people of the city. And I can tell you that based upon all the work I've done on this report, which I hope you will read, that this needs to be done as a first step.
Thank you for that.
But I'm here for questions offline, as you know, Chair, as always.
Absolutely. Thank you. And when is the report going to be final?
We're going to have it out within 2 weeks. We just have some more stakeholders. We're getting information, but one of the recommendations among others is to support this bill as it is. Reduce it, and let's study it, and let's see what happens, and then have an open mind in a couple of years. Fraud is rampant, but that's not the only reason for this. There are just few people that are benefiting from this. It's not, it's a judgment call. Are there a few people that might not have coverage? Yes.
Thank you. So we'll connect with you. We'll connect with you offline to talk about this further.
Okay.
Next, we'll hear from Eric McClure, followed by Andrew Greenblatt.
Starting time.
Eric, you're unmuted.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair. My name is Eric McClure. I'm the Executive Director of Streets PAC. I'm here to speak about Intro 193, which we strongly support. It would require taxis and other for-hire vehicles to display a decal reminding passengers to look for people on bicycles before opening the door when exiting the vehicle. New York State Vehicle and Traffic Law prohibits the opening of the car door into the path of moving traffic, which includes bicycles and other micromobility devices, and New York City's administrative code prohibits the opening of a car door into the path of a cyclist. Yet despite these prohibitions, dooring, as it's known colloquially, is an all too common occurrence in New York City. Dooring can cause serious injury and in the worst cases, death, most often when the victim is knocked into the path of a moving vehicle. At least one New Yorker has been killed in a dooring incident in each of the past 3 years. Kwok Kwan in Manhattan in 2022, Aziz Bek Soliv in Queens in 2023, and John Policelli in Brooklyn in 2024. The TLC has provided free anti-dooring decals for for-hire vehicles since 2012, but their display is not required. While the TLC believes their use is widespread, there's absolutely no good reason that their display shouldn't be mandated. While the safety of the person outside the vehicle is paramount, there's also a significant benefit to people inside the cab, and that liability in during incidents is almost always found to be completely the fault of the person opening the door, and awards to victims can amount to hundreds of thousands of dollars. This bill can both save lives and save taxi and FHV passengers money. On a personal note, several years ago, I nearly doored a cyclist when getting out of a cab near my home in Brooklyn. Luckily, the person on the bike was able to stop quickly, and I apologize profusely as someone who, given my work in advocacy, know better than to check before opening the door. Had there been a reminder decal on the door, luck wouldn't have been required to avoid a potentially catastrophic incident. We're grateful to Councilmember Gutierrez and her senior advisor, Anya Lair, for introducing this legislation, to the co-sponsors for their support, and to John Orcutt and Bike New York for conceiving the bill and working with us to advocate for it. We strongly urge the Council to pass Intro 193 as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Andrew Greenblatt, followed by Israel Acevedo.
Starting time.
Hi, good afternoon, Chair Brooks Powers and members of the committee. I am Andrew Greenblatt, the Policy Director of the Independent Drivers Guild, or IDG, and today I'll be testifying regarding Intro 1050. Behind me are a number of drivers who've been affected by the PIP law and are here to let you know that they too support 1050. The personal injury protection market in New York for Uber and Lyft drivers is in shambles. Insolvent companies are serving 70% of the market. Rates are rocketing up and the state is moving to raise them even faster. Drivers face higher rates if someone hits them or if their passenger opens the door into a bike lane. If God forbid that happens twice in 6 months, that driver is unable to get insurance and is therefore out of work. Imagine if someone spilled coffee on you in the office and suddenly you got a pay cut. Then someone else knocks over some papers from your desk and now you're fired. That's the life of a driver under the insane no-fault regime. The driver never gets a trial in which they can defend themselves. They just have to live with it. Now, New York City has decided in the past to add to this misery by raising the minimum coverage for these accidents from $50,000 to $200,000. This attracts fraudsters, hucksters, and cheats, all on the back of hardworking drivers. While this bill doesn't abolish the system, it at least gets New York City out of the business of further immiserating these drivers. The IDG supports this bill and thanks Councilmember De La Rosa for her advocacy and urges the committee to move Intro 1050 along to full passage by the City Council quickly. I would.
Israel Acevedo, followed by Kathleen Collins.
Starting time.
You're unmuted, Israel.
Can you see me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay. Good morning, Chair Brooks Powers and the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure. I have been an owner-operator driving the same for-hire vehicle for the last 8 years, and my TLC and DMV license are both clean. In 2021 and 2022, I was paying $301 in liability insurance. In 2023, I was paying $334. In 2024, I was paying $387, and now for 2025, I'm being told it will be $410. I am in support of local law to amend the administrative code of the City of New York in relation to limiting the amount of liability coverage the Taxi and Limousine Commission may require for vehicles it licenses, because we are the safest drivers in New York City, and the extremely high insurance we pay is burning thousands and thousands of drivers. On January 17, 2025, I sent an email to American Transit, and I was expressing the same thing I just expressed to you guys. And I was asking them why my insurance rates keep increasing when my TLC license is clean and my DMV license is clean. I never received a response from them. Okay. I have also shared my email to American Transit with Councilmember De La Rosa, okay, in support of this bill. Thank you for allowing me to testify.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Kathleen Collins, followed by Roberta Gray.
Starting time.
Good morning. My name is Kathleen Collins, and I'm a disabled New Yorker. I've been disabled all my life and lived in New York all my life. With respect to INT 0373-2024, I submit that it violates the Taxis for All agreement that we made with the city many years ago, as well as a federal court order. We have waited much too long to even have 50% of taxi cabs in operation on the street wheelchair accessible. If the city council passes this proposed bill, it will be sending the wrong message. That is, people with disabilities do not count. Please reject 373-2024. This is a civil rights issue. With respect to INT 06762024, we submit that this bill needs to be amended to also require that such a study and report include how we can have electric wheelchair accessible for hire vehicles as well as charging infrastructure available for vehicles, including motorized wheelchairs in New York City. Additionally, with respect to Resolution 0080-2024, we submit that this resolution needs to be amended to require that all future for-hire vehicles that are electric also be accessible. Finally, we would like to see this committee support a bill that would require the Taxi and Limousine Commission to continue the accessible dispatch program as it presently operates. It's not broken, so what needs to be fixed? With respect to that, we also submit that the City Council needs to provide sufficient funds separate from the Taxi Improvement Fund to pay for this very important program, that is the Accessible Dispatch Program, because it works. Thank you for your time and for listening to us today.
Thank you, Kathleen. Next, we'll hear from Roberti Gray, followed by Raul Rivera.
Starting time.
Good afternoon. May it please the council. My name is Robert Gray. I am an attorney. I have spent the past 37 years representing injured workers, including many medallion taxi drivers and for-hire vehicle drivers, as well as various passengers, pedestrians, bicyclists, and others who were injured in vehicular accidents in the city of New York. It's regrettable that the council has not gotten a whole lot of accurate information about what covers who and when in the context of a motor vehicle accident in the city of New York. The no-fault law protects passengers, pedestrians, livery cab drivers who are generally not covered by workers' compensation, medallion owner-operators, and in the event of a medallion driver or a black car driver who has a controverted or a contested workers' compensation case or a disallowed case, it also covers them. What does not cover black car drivers and medallion drivers is no fault if they're injured while performing a covered service. That's the role of workers' compensation, either from Hereford or from the Black Car Fund. So the Black Car Fund coverage, to the extent it was pointed to today, does not duplicate or overlap no-fault coverage. They're two entirely separate animals. The other thing that's not really relevant to this conversation is liability insurance, which was pointed to by some of the witnesses as a meaningful alternative to no fault. Liability insurance is a meaningful alternative to no fault if you don't mind waiting 3 or 4 or 5 years with no wage loss payments and no medical coverage before you get some money to pay those bills. I am in complete agreement with the Taxi and Limousine Commission.
Time has expired.
If you want to just finish your sentence, I felt like you were mid-sentence.
That for-hire vehicles require better coverage than typical citizens, because the typical citizen is driving to and from someplace, whereas a taxi or a for-hire vehicle is in constant operation. And I also completely agree with the TLC that eliminating the additional $150,000 in no-fault coverage does not mean the drivers are going to save a nickel. What's more likely to happen is simply shrinkflation, where the same premium gets charged for lower coverage. And lastly, with regard to American Transit being $700 million insolvent, as TLC pointed out, that's not something that occurred overnight. That's a result of American Transit's poor claim decisions and overall poor decisions over decades, and it should not be bailed out by removing insurance coverage for folks who need it.
Thank
And
you.
the last thing I'll just point out based
I'm
on my
sorry, if you
experience
could
as an
just
attorney-
submit the remainder in writing, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we will hear from Raul Rivera, followed by Christopher Leon Johnson.
Starting time.
Good afternoon. My name is Raul Rivera. I'm a TLC driver and a TLC driver advocate. We want to share this testimony with Commissioner David Doe. I had a meeting with him in 2022. We want to remind him that the TLC driver is not a gig worker. It's disrespectful to call him a gig worker. He is not a gig worker. We are small business owners. Also, intro 1050, I'm against it. We want to know who's supporting this bill. Is anybody that's supporting this bill, are they receiving money from Uber? We see that IDG is supporting 1050 and they're funded by Uber. So we say no to 1050. We have to be careful who is pushing this bill. When it comes to Intro 193, Intro 193, I am for it, but you have to be careful that the stickers are not being sold. That's what happens with these stickers. They're supposed to be free, are being sold, and many of the garages and fleet companies, they have people there that are not trustworthy, and they're selling these stickers. It's happened to me in the past, and we also want to make a note that we reached out to your office, Chair, for a meeting. I don't know if you want to meet with us. If you don't want to meet with us, we appreciate a response, even if it's a no.
Did you complete the form that was sent to you by my scheduler?
We did.
Okay, I'll follow up. Thank you.
4 emails. Thank you so much.
Christopher Leon Johnson.
Starting time.
He's not on the Zoom right now.
If we have inadvertently missed anyone that has registered to testify today and has yet to have been called, please use the Zoom hand function if you are testifying remotely, and you will be called in that order that your hand is raised. If you are testifying in person, please come to the dais. With that, this hearing is now adjourned. Thank